Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph.
And I'm MD.
Let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today.
So grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, and your wine if it's the evening. But either way, let's get into it. Today's case is about Katrina Brownlee. And this is a story of love, grace, and hope. Now, struggling at 18 years old, single mom Katrina Brownlee was living in Brooklyn in the projects. She met the man of her dreams, a correction officer on Rikers Island, Alex Irvin. She believed that he was going to be her way out of the projects. He was her ticket. He had a car, a career, and she believed he could protect her. She believed that she hit the lottery when she met him. But shortly after they started dating, he immediately showed his violent temper. He beat her in the streets, and that was her words. He beat her in the streets. But she stood by him. Even her grandmother told her that she should stay because he has a job and he's willing to take care of you and your daughter. So you need to stay. Steph, what are your thoughts about that?
It's just so unfortunate. It actually reminds me of Michelet, the singer. And she was so used to seeing her grandfather and father like beat up the maternal figures in her life, like whether it be her grandmother or her mother, that when Dr. Dre started to hit her, she was just like, oh, he loves me. This is just a part of love. And she didn't even mind to talk to anybody about it because that behavior was normalized in her upbringing. And it's contrary to what we think or what you may believe where you fall on the issue, we look up to the elders in our lives. And so when somebody tells you something like that you should just put up with it, it's like, what?
I mean, and she's 18 years old, so you can imagine, like, oh, if Granny told me that I should stay, then
I should stay.
I should stay. And so she stayed, despite the fact that he physically assaulted her. Not long after her and Alex had a baby together, With 2 daughters, she hoped that the beating would end, but it didn't. The beatings continued, and anything could spark his violent outburst. She often called the police, but they would tell her and them to just work it out, or there would be silence altogether, and she knew that the minute that they saw Alex's badge, it was what she called the blue wall of silence. She recognized that they wouldn't help, and so as a result, she stopped calling. Alex and Katrina eventually moved from Brooklyn to Long Island. They had been together about this time for 5 years. And then she found out that she was pregnant with another baby. And the beatings continued. But this time, Katrina knew she needed to do something different. So she decided she was going to leave. It was going to be difficult, but she was going to do whatever she needed to do to get out of this relationship. And so she moved to a local hotel. But soon after she did, the money started to run out and she had to call Alex for help. But when she called Alex, he was like a completely different person. He seemed like he had changed. He even encouraged her to come over and that he was willing to help her. And she was hopeful that things this time would be different. She wasn't trying to go back to him, but she definitely wanted to utilize his help. So she left her older daughter with a neighbor, and she took her younger daughter with her to go see Alex on January 9th to rekindle what she called this new friendship with Alex and to get money for support. But once she arrived, he opened the door. He looked weird and he looked strange, and she thought that was odd, but she put that thought behind her. And she ended up putting her youngest daughter down, and when she came back to talk to Alex, he wasted no time. Steph, he immediately shot her in the stomach, and then he shot her again. And Katrina looks down at her stomach and notices that she wasn't bleeding, She looks back at Alex in shock, like, I can't believe you just shot me. Like, what is happening? And he tells her to shut up. She tried to crawl away, but he shot her in the arm. She tried to call 911, but the phone lines were cut.
Katrina was desperately trying to get away. He kicked her in the face and then he tortured her. It was obvious that Alex didn't just want her dead, he wanted her to suffer. And he mocked her as he fired shots. He would say things like, "Is this the bullet that is going to end your life?" Katrina continued to try to crawl away. Alex picked her up and carried her into the bathroom where he continued to torture her. He emptied his revolver on Katrina 2 times and he continued to torture her for over an hour. Alex thought of everything. He ensured the doors and windows were locked. The phone line was cut so he could torture Katrina the entire time without being interrupted or the fear of her calling out. However, Alex didn't count on his friend showing up and knocking at the door. When he opened up the door and let his friend in, his friend walked in to a sight of horrors. There was blood everywhere. Shocked, he asked what happened, and Alex explained that he flipped out and shot Katrina. He takes him into the bathroom to see Katrina on the ground, barely holding on to life. And I'm just gonna stop and just talk about, man, this friend must have wanted to immediately get out, like ASAP. Because I can't imagine walking into a scene to seeing blood everywhere and not just being like, you know what, I gotta go. I don't even need to know.
You know, Steph, we recorded an episode last week where we talked about just how certain people just were extremely calm in the midst of like crazy situations. And I feel like that's what this friend was here. You know, he probably had to be like, I gotta hold it together because obviously I'm sitting in front of an idiot and he probably can snap and shoot and kill me. So I need to figure out how to maneuver. But at the same time, I don't want to put myself in jeopardy of committing a crime. Like, you know,
right.
I cannot, I mean, just seriously, put yourself in this friend's shoes. You coming to your boy's house just to like kick it. Hey, what's up? Let's chop it up. And you walk in and see blood everywhere. And then he takes you to his bathroom and he's like, look, I snapped.
Bro, she on the ground.
She, you know, she went off and I snapped. What?
Yeah. And I'm sure just the state of pure shock needs to settle in. Like, because your brain can't keep up when trauma like that happens. So the friend jumps into action. He picks up Katrina, runs her to his car. He puts Katrina in the back seat, rushes to the driver's seat. Alex also jumps into the passenger seat. The entire drive to the hospital, the friend is begging and pleading with Katrina to fight and to hold on. Once at the hospital, the friend places Katrina in a wheelchair and takes her into the ER. He then gets back into his car and speeds off because he can't stick around for the questions that obviously will ensue.
Right, and he definitely can't stick around for the questions when he has the actual perpetrator in his vehicle.
Right. So that just sounds like a scene from the movies.
Hollywood.
Seriously. I mean, you cannot make this type of stuff up. Doctors jump into action while police are called to the hospital. Carrie Herzak was the prosecutor at the time, and she, along with the police officers, arrive at the hospital. The doctors were unable to remove 6 of the bullets in her body. She was in and out of consciousness. During one of her conscious moments, the police and Carrie were able to take down what they believe was going to be her dying declaration. Doctors did not believe that Katrina would make it through the night. However, Katrina believed in beating the odds. When she finally woke up, all she wanted to know was, were her babies okay? And the baby that she was actually carrying in her stomach. Unfortunately, the baby died. But her 2 girls were fine. Not only did he take away their unborn child, but she would never be able to have children again.
The doctors didn't believe that she would be able to walk again either, or have any kind of semblance of a normal life. They believed that she would be confined to a wheelchair. She was devastated because she was homeless now, and she didn't have anybody to take care of her. She believed that she had finally hit rock bottom. She couldn't take care of herself. She had no place to live and no family to help her. But Alex Irvin's mother let her move to her Brooklyn house. So Alex Irvin's mother contacted her, feeling sorry for her, obviously, because my son is crazy. He tried to kill you. Why don't you go ahead and stay in my Brooklyn home so that you have somewhere to stay? Because it was vacant. But she was extremely, happy that she had that, but she was so depressed because she was so depressed that she could barely give any kind of effort. But one day, her physical therapist gave her the hope that she needed to spur her on to try. After being told that she couldn't walk again, Katrina once again beat the odds. She got better, and she started to hit and exceed every milestone provided to her. Meanwhile, Carrie, the prosecutor, was fighting just as hard to ensure that she got justice from the crime that occurred, that Alex would be found behind bars. Now, initially, Katrina was helping Carrie with the case, but soon Katrina started to become distant, and Carrie soon learned that it was because Alex Irvin was contacting her every day from jail and threatening her to not testify. Now, Steph, that sounds eerily similar to somebody right now in the news.
Diddy-esque once again.
Diddy-esque. Part of the reason why Diddy, and we if you would like, we've already recorded our paid subscription episode about Diddy's case. But part of the reason why Diddy did not get released on from his indictment and get bail is because he was calling potential witnesses and threatening their lives. Like, even if he didn't threaten them, he's calling them excessively, and that is an inference of a threat. And that's basically what Alex Irvin was doing here. He was calling her incessantly, and he was actually threatening her to not testify. And this wasn't the first time Katrina received harassing messages like this. A few months prior, she was kicked out of Alex Irvin's mom's house because she refused to write a letter stating that she shot herself and that it wasn't Alex. That she shot herself multiple times, Steph. Not, he unloaded his revolver. I think you said he unloaded his revolver 2 times.
So she did all of that?
She did all of that on her own. She did that to herself. She continued to shoot herself multiple times.
Girl.
Now, Carrie couldn't believe the lengths that Alex Irvin would stoop. And let me just also add the lengths that his mother would also stoop.
Once Carrie ensured those calls stopped, she received a letter from the defense attorneys that appeared to be in Katrina's handwriting that stated that it was an accident and that if she was subpoenaed to testify, she would testify for the defense. When Carrie called Katrina, she said she wasn't going to come in and wasn't going to talk about it and was going to disappear. But Carrie didn't care. She was willing to fight for Katrina, even if she wasn't willing to fight for herself. So they issued subpoenas to Katrina and hoped against hope that she would actually show up.
Yeah, the thing about, when it comes to a criminal case and even in a civil case, you have witnesses that their testimony is going to be in your favor. And so in this instance, Carrie, the prosecutor, knew that Katrina's testimony was in her favor. And she didn't need Katrina's testimony because she actually had words that Katrina said on her dying bed, right? And that is admissible in evidence. But you want Katrina to be present in the case because this is going to help seal the deal, really, against Alex, who, in any normal case, this would have been, the evidence that they had would have been enough without Katrina's testimony. But because Alex was he was a correctional officer, you just want to have as much evidence as possible. And so in these kinds of cases where you have a witness who could present favorable testimony to your side, if they choose that they're not going to show up on their own voluntarily, then you can subpoena them and demand that they show up. Because just so you know, you don't get to just say, I'm not going to go, I'm not going to testify. Yeah, the attorney can actually demand that you show up by issuing you a subpoena. And if you get that subpoena, guess who has to go to court? And if you don't go to court, guess who could potentially go to jail for not showing up?
You. So April 1994, the trial started, and on day 4, Katrina walked into the courtroom door. She decided that she was going to come and get her power back. Soon after, Alex saw her and decided, let me just plead guilty to these charges. Carrie, the prosecutor, was angry that he took a plea because she wanted him to go to trial. She pleaded with the judge to give him the maximum amount of time that he could receive, but he didn't listen. The judge gave Alex the lightest sentence possible, 5 to 15 years for attempted murder.
Attempted murder. 5 to 15 years. He very literally not only attempted to end this woman's life,
he murdered their child.
He murdered their child. And he tortured her for hours.
Right.
It's not like he just like, oh, I shot you once, I almost killed you. It's no, I literally unloaded my revolver on you 2 times. I cut the phone line so that you could not call out for help. And I made sure, you could even argue that he kidnapped her.
Yeah.
Like, I think that the elements of kidnapping are met here. And he got 5 to 15 years. If that does not scream blue code of silence.
Absolutely. Even though Carrie was irritated, Katrina was grateful to Carrie because she fought for her when no one else would. Katrina went on to focus on her future. She decided that the criminal justice system failed her, and she felt the only thing that would rectify this was to change it from the inside. 8.5 years later, she joined the NYPD. She wanted to become what she needed all those years ago, a good cop. And 2 months after training, she became a first responder for 9/11. Alex Irvin was released from prison after serving 10 years, and at the time, Katrina was still at the beginning of her career. But she focused on serving the best she could. She kept her past a secret from law enforcement because she was scared it would be used against her and some way ruin her reputation.
And Steph, that like makes so much sense, right? Because I think oftentimes, especially as Black women, and would love to get your thoughts on this. We feel like we have to hide certain of us in our careers because if people knew this about us, they would use it against us. And in this case, she felt like if the police knew, if her own fellow officers knew what she went through, that they would not laud her as being a heroine to survive it, but that, they could use it against her.
It's unfortunate. I think we all go through this, whether you're a woman or man. You feel your past traumas, especially in her line of work, would disparage her reputation. But in fact, it does the opposite. People need to know that they're not alone, and there are, I'm sure, many other police officers who's been through domestic abuse before, maybe even attempted murder.
Right, something similar. Well, Katrina went on to become an undercover cop, and she also became a community affairs officer and earned the highest rank as a first grade detective. In 2014, she became one of the few Black women in the NYPD to serve on the mayor of New York's security detail. She worked as a police officer for 20 years and then decided to retire. And it was right before she retired that she shared with the mayor what happened to her all those years ago. She wrote a book called And Then Came the Blues. Katrina is the true depiction of not allowing her circumstances to define her. In her retirement, she continues to serve the community. She created an organization that mentors young ladies to keep them from going down the same path that she did when she was younger. And in reflecting on the story that forever altered the course of her life, Katrina recounts that she actually forgave Alex Irvin. She stated that she had to forgive him in order to get her control, her power, and her peace back. There is no peace when you harbor all that hate inside you. That's a very powerful statement.
Takeaway. I'll let you do this one since last week I wrapped that up.
My takeaway here is we have covered, before I give my takeaway, let me say that a lot of times we've covered domestic violence cases on our podcast. And if you are any kind of a fan of true crime, you realize that a lot of cases involve domestic violence. And there's obviously a systematic issue here at play. But what I loved about this case in particular is that, one, Katrina Brownlee survived. I mean, we can really just stop there. She survived. But Katrina Brownlee didn't just survive. She used what happened to her to implement change. And she did not allow that one situation that could be life altering, that she could have gone in a completely opposite direction. She could have given up hope. She could have given up on physical therapy. She could have just, put her hands up and said, it is what it is, and just became a part of the system. And her children could have became a part of the system. Instead, she decided that she was going to implement change and to do it in the best way she knew how. And that was to go become an officer. I think that in the culture that we live in, and this goes to my takeaway, in the culture that we live in, we highlight the bad cops. And it's because when something bad happens, that's what you're looking at. But the truth of the matter is that just as real as there are bad cops, there are good cops. And Katrina Brownlee is an example of a good cop. A cop who has the experience of being in poverty, living in poverty, calling on the cops and them not being there, being involved in domestic violence, being a victim of a crime, and not having the justice system stand up for her. And yet she went in and became the exact opposite of that. And so my takeaway is that it's not good to put everybody in a box and say that this is exactly how they are, right? And all cops are bad, and all cops should be, stiff-armed and, viewed as non-helpers and non-community servants, because there are so many bad ones that exist in the world. It's to be able to understand that there are some genuine good cops out here that value what they do, that love their job, and that want to be community activists and helpers in the world in which they live, and to implement change in the world in which they live. And I'm just so grateful to have known this story. And I absolutely love when I have a story that ends where there wasn't murder. There was murder in this case, but where, somebody survived and was able to tell the story.
And we want to encourage you guys to make sure that you share, if you care, this episode with friends and family. Also, we want to ask that you participate via the comment section on Spotify, or drop something on Instagram or Facebook. Just let us know what you think about this case. That's our case for today. We hope you guys enjoyed it. MD, do you want to tell us a little bit about Marcellus?
Here recently in the news, you may have heard about a gentleman by the name of Marcellus Williams. And Marcellus Williams was actually executed in St. Louis, Missouri, for a crime that we are unsure he committed. And so, this case, as an attorney, really rubbed me the wrong way. And you guys know, I always joke about, I could never be a criminal attorney. I don't want to get in that world. And so, the most I love to do is talk about it on my podcast with Steph, but it just really grinds my gears when you see a justice system that you love, which I'm going to be very honest. I love the legal system. That's why I got involved in it. I do understand that it's not perfect and it does not work all the time, and there needs to be change. And just like in this case, this is my way to implement change, is to be a part of the solution and not the problem. But when you see the justice system absolutely fail, it infuriates me. And in this particular case, Marcellus was found guilty of murdering a white woman, and for a crime that occurred back in the early 1990s. And he was on death row. But in recent years, they determined that the DNA evidence that they used to convict him actually was found to be not his DNA was not found on the murder weapon. It wasn't found on any of the items that they used against him at his trial. And as a result, the Innocence Project undertook his case to try to get him off of death row. In fact, the victim in this case, her parents advocated for him to be taken off of death row as well, because the evidence was not there to support his conviction. It was doubts and questions. And what I always tell you guys is the burden that a prosecutor has to reach in order to get a guilty verdict is beyond a reasonable doubt. So if there is even an ounce of doubt, you cannot convict. And so when you use this evidence that, hey, his DNA was not found on the weapon, his DNA was not found on this evidence, then if that was presented to the jury at that time, would he have been found guilty? And that's the question that should have been answered. And so anyway, this case ends up going before the Supreme Court of Missouri. The Supreme Court of Missouri decides not to issue a stay. The governor decides not to issue a stay. It ends up getting bumped up all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, where you would just think that those judges, above any other judge, would do the legal right thing. Because I will be honest, like they did say that that they did determine, because I want to be fair here, that while they did not find his DNA evidence on the murder weapon or the evidence that they had to convict him at trial, they did determine that evidence was tampered with, and so it was contaminated. And so it wasn't just that his DNA wasn't there. It's possible that it was just so contaminated that you couldn't find his DNA evidence. But again, to me, that is enough to take that person out of death row. Because while I do agree with the death penalty, I'm a person that does agree with the death penalty, I think that it should be rarely used. And the reason why, and I almost am at a point where I think it should not be used. And the reason why I don't think it should be used is because you have cases like this. You have cases like the Brooklyn, what was the five, Steph, that
Central Park.
The Central Park Five. I was going to call them the Brooklyn Five. But the Central Park Five, you have cases like the Central Park Five where you are so sure that they're guilty, only to determine later that they weren't. And because there are cases like that exist, it is so difficult for me to like back the death penalty. Because what if you convicted a person that you later determined to be innocent? Because new technological evidence or new technological advances allow you to see, oh, that person wasn't guilty. And while I don't think that necessarily he should have been freed from jail, I definitely don't think that he should have been convicted and sentenced to death. Anyway, they go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides that they are not going to issue a stay. And as of September 24th at 6 p.m., he was executed.
If you're on social media and you wondered what that was all about, we wanted to provide a brief synopsis of the case. And we want to know what you think. We want to know if you agree on MD's take, or does that make you curious enough to go look and dig up some information for yourself. We will see you guys next week. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black.